Hello, world history students. Welcome back. We are back and talking about Cold War conflicts. This is the Cold War and decolonization, and this is your data decode or guided notes 15.2. So let's go. So remember that World War II basically destroyed European supremacy in world affairs. So Europe really didn't recover from any of this. So we're talking mainly like, France and Great Britain, right? So because of that, major European powers, the two biggest superpowers, kind of emerged from World War II. And those two biggest superpowers were the United States and the Soviet Union. And they grew stronger and more powerful. And now because of that, European countries or nations were kind of divided in these two camps. Either you were anti-communist or non-communist, or you were communist, right? Depending on which side you were on, US versus the Soviet Union. And because of that, there were some wars called Proxy Wars, right? Because neither power, neither the United States nor the Soviet Union wanted to go directly to war with each other because they just got out of World War II, right? They didn't want to fight in a la blatant world war again. Not to mention, because of the threat of nuclear arsenals, they did not want to even tread on that, right? So what they decided to do was fight in these proxy wars. And a proxy war, as you see here, is where two governmental powers in conflict use substitutes instead of directly fighting each other. And that's what the United States and the Soviet Union did. With satellite states or states that they had influence in, they used those states to influence and instigate wars that they knew those satellite states were trying to fight for their independence or to try to decolonize. And they would instigate or they would provide aid. We talked about Truman policy and COMCON and so forth. They would do things like that in order to instigate their fighting internally in those satellite states instead of them fighting each other for themselves, right? So as you see here in the United States, they had influence in Israel and Pakistan, right, and India and so forth, and they're trying to use them so that they can attack the Soviet Union, and vice versa, right, with the Soviet Union having influence in China and Afghanistan, and Thailand and Laos and Vietnam and so forth in order to attack the United States, okay, and also Cuba, which we're going to talk about here. So let's go into some examples of proxy wars that happen in Asia, Southeast Asia, and also in Latin America and the Caribbean as well. Okay. In Southeast Asia, let's talk about the Korean War. The Korean War, Japan controlled Korea, until 1945, after the end of World War II, right? So as allied powers at the time, the United States and the Soviet Union agreed to divide Korea into two zone parallels along the 38th parallel. That's their latitude line, right? The plan was to unify Korea into one country, one state, right? However, as the US and Soviet relationships got worse, there were two entities or two states that emerged, which was communist North Korea and anti-communist or non-communist South Korea. All right, and that's what you see here in this picture right here. Okay, with the approval of Stalin, communist North Korea decided to invade non-communist South Korea. Harry S. Truman at the time, and this is in 1950s, Harry S. Truman at the time saw this as an example of communist aggression and expansion. So he got permission from the United Nations to send in US troops into South Korea to help push back North Korean troops out of South Korea. And this was the Korean War. After 3 years of fighting, there was no victory. Okay? None whatsoever. An armistice was signed, and an armistice basically in this case is like a pause. They're saying, okay, we're not giving up, but we're going to pause for a minute. We're just going to let this sit for a little bit, right? So technically, the Korean War never really ended, okay? Because it was just an armistice. It's just a pause, right? So led to no victory. Nobody said won or not, right? And to this day, there is the 38th parallel, which is a boundary line between North Korea and South Korea, okay? North Korea being communist, South Korea being non-communist, right? And then this area here along the 38th parallel is called a demilitarized zone, or DMZ, which means that there's supposed to be no military action, no military equipment, nothing in that region at all, okay? But it is heavily protected. Just keep that in mind. All right. So to many Americans, especially the U.S. government, they saw this as a victory of containing communism in North Korea and pushing back communism in North Korea. Because till this day, South Korea is still non-communist and North Korea is communist. Here's another example of a proxy war that happened very close to the United States. In this case, this was called the Cuban Missile Crisis. So in the late 1950s, early 1960s, this was the presidency of JFK, or John F. Kennedy. And the confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union reached a level of epic proportions, which was entirely frightening. Okay. In Cuba, the Batista government, which was a U.S. supported government and possibly U.S. appointed president in Cuba, Batista was overthrew, or there was a coup d'etat that was led by this guy that you see here, Fidel Castro, and he was a left-wing revolutionary, Soviet supported, and he set up a totalitarian regime in Cuba that was communist socialist and Soviet supported, right? The United States government was totally upset and annoyed and in shock because, of course, having a communist government very close to the US mainland, they saw that as a threat, okay? A threat to the security of the United States. Especially, remember we talked about nuclear arsenals, right? Okay. President Kennedy feared so much that Castro, along with the support, right? Remember, this is proxy. So in proxy, thinking that the Soviet Union is going to do something with Castro and that they may retaliate against them for moving against Berlin and that whole Berlin issue with the Berlin Wall, etc., that he decided to stop this at the seams and invade Cuba. That was called the Bay of Pigs invasion. Okay, let's just say that Bay of Pigs invasion did not go well whatsoever. Okay, they invaded. They were trying to take down Fidel Castro and that regime in Cuba, but it didn't go well at all. And the paramilitary that was sent by the CIA and the government had to turn tail and head back, and some of them were even captured by Castro and his military. Okay, but this set the stage for a very, very tense situation, and I would love for you to watch this TED Talk or this TED Ed. If you're in my class, you will definitely get a chance to watch this and see how extremely, extremely close we were to a World War III. Okay, very close. Watch it and see. Thanks for watching this first half of Cold War conflicts. Let's go into the next half in part 2.